That's I'm willing to do this for anybody interested.
All right. So I pressed record, John, and to a reminder to everybody else or people that are listening to this later recording, this is recording and we put it up on the Restoration Archive site, so it will be made available later as all of the other ones are there. So we'll turn it over to you, John.
Okay. Well, tonight we're starting on slide number 78 of the slides which are on my website on the right-hand side of the front page. In the column at the top, it says something like tutorial increases daily or something. And last week we just finished talking about the length of the Venus cycle. We haven't started really on the Venus calendar. That's tonight. But we talked about why in your astronomy book, it'll say the period of Venus is 224 days to go around the sun. But the cycle in the calendar is 584 days because it's not Venus going around the sun. It's going as seen from the Earth, as if the Earth were stationary. And it says seen relative to the sun. And so this picture that we're looking at now is a picture where not only is the sun stationary, but the Earth is stationary. It just sits at the bottom and rotates. In other words, this is a rotating frame that we're looking at. I don't want to get into the complicated part. Just the whole thing is designed to be seen as if the Earth were at rest. And if you talk to Einstein, he'll say that that's fair to do that, even with rotation. So with that in mind, this is how the orbit of Venus looks from a stationary Earth compared to the sun. It has an evening star and a morning star phase. That's because it's between us and the sun. And so it disappears in the sunshine, both when it's between us and the sun and also when it's on the far side. So the center part of this diagram is when Venus is invisible. And it's about 8 days on the average. It can go from 0 to 15. In fact, it can go from less than 0. There are times when you can see it set as an evening star and rise. You can see it rise in the morning and still set as an evening star. Anyway, on the average, it's about 8 days between the two phases. And most people consider the beginning point to be what's numbered 7 in this picture, where it rises with the sun as a morning star. It's called the heliacal rising. And it's up as a morning star, which is what it is now, for about 263 days on the average. And then it disappears on the far side of the sun for about 50 days. And then it's equal and opposite, so it's 263 as an evening star. And so as a morning star, it's going to, what happens is it rises a little bit before the sun. And then when the sun comes up, it disappears because the sun is so bright. And as an evening star, it sets just after, it rises, it's visible just after the sun sets at whatever height it is. And then it sets as an evening star. And let's see if I've just covered everything it says at the top. Evening and morning star, yep, we just covered all of that. So yeah, if you add up all those numbers, it comes to 584, very, very closely. Let's go to the next slide now. Now, as it's used as a calendar, we've talked before that all of the calendars are based on 13. The planetary calendars, just like a lot of calendars, are based on the 7-day week. And so So the phases of Venus are rounded off to the nearest 13 days. So the invisibility part is counted as 13 days. The morning and evening stars are both 260 instead of 263, because that's 20 times 13. In fact, that's exactly a sacred round. We talked about that earlier. The sacred round is 20 times 13 days. So Venus is a morning star for one sacred round and an evening star. And again, the variation is enough that these numbers can almost be considered exact, because it actually varies quite a bit. And then it's hidden in the sunlight for 52 days. So now we're going to see how these phases are named on the calendar. So let's go to the next slide. Okay. Oh, this slide is showing how to fix it. Just like the Enoch calendar puts a whole week in to correct it from 364 days to be 365 and a quarter. If you skip one 13-day trecena during 12 585-day Venus cycles, then the average comes out really, really close, 583.92, and that's correct. So just skipping one trecena every 12 cycles is an excellent approximation. I mentioned earlier that I thought that would be, my first thought was, well, that's the way to correct it. Just always every 12 cycles, skip one. But that's not what the Lord does. He uses something much more interesting and has much more information. And we talked about this before in it. But on the average, it comes out the same, about the same, so that it averages out correctly. So now let's go to, slide 81. This is what got me started on the whole project. I read in a book by Anthony Avini called Sky Watchers of Ancient Mexico, which was written in 1980. And I read it right about 1980, or it was published then. And he says that the Aztecs not only followed the cycle, but they symbolized the cycle of life. They said Venus is born when it rises as an evening star, dies when it sets. And remember that after it sets, it's just invisible for a few days. And they said it was, at that time, it goes into the underworld and fight. First Venus, and then we'll move on. It sets, and then it resurrects as the bright and morning star when it rises. As the morning star a few days later. So let's break this down even more now. Next slide, 82. So Venus is born, rises in the west as an evening star. Then it reaches prime. Now we're looking at the same picture, but now we have there's 9 phases. And this took some time to discover. I've been working on this for at least a couple of decades. Now it looks like it's done, but it took a lot of time. Anyway, that's not important. Results are important. There's 9 phases in Venus. So at point 3, it actually starts over at point 1, which is, it's interesting. It's in the Mayan Codex, the Dresden Codex, which has Venus tables in it. The scholars who have looked at it can tell when it sets and when it rises, and all of that makes sense. But they say there's this strange point, and it's over where 1 is. And they say nothing happens there. And they couldn't figure it out. They said it's some religious thing. Well, that's actually the starting point of the cycle, and it represents creation or conception. And then when it sets as a morning star, that's quickening. That's when the spirit goes into the body of the infant before it's born. See, it goes into darkness. Wherever the spirit is before birth, it's in the light somewhere. And when it goes into the fetus, it goes into darkness, and then it's born over on 3. And so 3 is birth. 4 is also a point that's not really too clear, but that's when it becomes an adult, and it's really more like accountability, like at age 8. And then 5 is when it's prime, and that's when it's brightest. If you notice, this is all compared to the Earth. You can see how much closer it is to the Earth at 0.5 than it is at farther points. It's really close. And that's when Venus is just blazing up there. And if it starts getting much past 5, then it starts to become a skinny, skinny crescent where it's going to disappear. So it's brightest at 0.5. And also, and farthest, that's the largest angle from the sun. So it's highest and brightest, and I call it prime. Then it dies, that name I got from the Aztecs. It dies when it sets. It resurrects at 7, just a few days later. Then on the calendar, it's 13 days later. And then it rises again, very bright. And if you've seen Venus in the morning for maybe the last month, it's pretty bright. Well, it's in this phase between 7 and 8, where it's rising higher. Every morning when you first see it, it's higher in the sky. And that's because it's moving away from the sun. That's the angle from the sun. That's where it's highest and brightest, again at 0.8. And that is called fullness. I call it fullness because it's bright, and it's going to tie to fullness of the priesthood. I try to use double meanings on these names, the ones I had to supply. Some were given by the Aztecs. The only ones given by the Aztecs were birth, death, and resurrection. Excuse me. And I got 0.1 from the Venus tables. So almost all of the points were defined for me. And then Lord, Lord is the last, well, anyway, it's all through the Mayan stuff, the last day of their cycle. The last day of the sacred round is flower, which represents Lord. And the last day of this cycle is also Lord. And that's when the person that this represents becomes like unto God. And that completes the cycle. Okay, next step. Next slide, 83. Now here is the same thing that we just saw. This gets tricky now, but tricky to visualize, but I've drawn it for you. This is how that same cycle looks as seen from what looks like a flat circular Earth, which is how things appear. So you look at number 3, Venus is born rising in the west. That's where it comes up out of the ground where it's been hidden. This is at night. So when the sun's down and it's with the sun, then it looks like it's coming up out of the earth and it's being born. So 3 is where it's born. It rises until it's an adult. Prime, that doesn't look highest in the picture, but that's supposed to represent when it's highest and brightest in the picture, in the sky. And then it sets at 0.6, death. And the numbers in this, by the way, are important. 6 is usually death. On the sacred round, the skull is day number 6. So all the symbolisms everywhere and important. So that journey there as evening star took one sacred round, took about 9 months or 260 days. Then this shows a long circle from 6 to 7 in the underground, but that's really only a few days. And then it resurrects in the east, goes up to brightness at fullness, and goes into Lord and then creation. Lord and creation are only separated by 13 days. So all of these are phases, and I should say that these phases are synced up with the sacred round, which has the trecena, where days are numbered from 1 to 13. So the beginning of every phase of Venus is always on a day 1. And when they insert the leap days, it's a whole trecena it's actually skipped, not inserted. And so it's all the phases are always on day 1. Okay, let's go to the next slide. I'm hoping. Now we're coming to slide number 84. We are now coming to what are the holy days. All of these calendars have holy days, and we've discussed those on the previous calendars that we've talked about. It turns out that the first and last day of each Venus phase is holy. And the last day of a phase is counted as day 0 of the next phase. In Doctrine and Covenants, section 29, verse 30, I think it is, the Lord makes this amazing statement that, to me, amazing. He says, in everything that's been created by the word of my power, the last is the first, and the first is the last. And that has so many meanings. But one of them is this: the last day of each phase is indeed the 0th, I call it the 0th day of the next, which is, you can think of that as the first day, but it's the 0th, the beginning day of the next. So for instance, the 12 days of 13 days of Lord are 1 Lord, 2 Lord, up to 12 Lord. And then instead of saying 13 Lord and 1 creation, it goes to 0 creation and 1 creation. So the 13 is like the 0. And we had earlier, we looked at pictures of clocks and saw that just like the 12 on our clock is really a 0. It's when things begin. The 13 is really a 0. I just think this is all so clever.
It is.
All of the Venus holy days are major holy days except for a 0 adult, 1 adult, 0 death, 1 death. So there's 7 major holy days and 7 pairs of major holy days and 2 pair of just minor holy days. And they're the ones that are kind of negative. Death is kind of negative, and adult is at the birth of the natural man, where you start to go backwards. Oh, I didn't say that on the, I'm not sure that's in this set of slides, but yeah, well, anyway, I'll just say it here, and then I might repeat it. But that day prime, adult, is when the natural man is born, when you become accountable, usually around age 8. And most people are backsliding and become evil then. And that time, the prime, when it was highest during life, that was rebirth and baptism. And it'll turn out that Christ was baptized on that day. But that's not just the ordinance of baptism, the real rebirth, where the natural man dies and you only want to do good after that, and you're really converted, is what prime is all about. Okay, let's go to, and that's why adult is negative, like kind of like death. Okay, let's go to the next slide, 85. So these are the 9 pairs of holy days. Oh yes, and all 9 of them correspond to days on the sacred round. So the 9 phases of Venus are on the left from creation through Lord. We just discussed them. On the right of the slide are the days. There's 20 days on the sacred round. The sacred round is like more detail. Venus has 9 phases. The sacred round gives 20 steps of life, but this is how they correspond. The creation is like light, and this conception, we talked about how light is like the spark of conception. And I just learned, by the way, a few days ago that at real conception, there is a flash of light. That I've always heard of the spark, but I guess I missed somewhere that there really is light given off at conception. Quickening is the wind that spirit enters. Birth is like temple. Adult is dragon. That's where evil enters. Prime is serpent. And I think we talked about that the serpent represents rebirth because the serpent can crawl out of its skin and be born again. And that's what prime is. So, and then skull is death. That's no surprise. Reed, we talked about his resurrection, and sure enough, that corresponds to resurrection of Venus. The eagle, this one's not as obvious. Fullness in the Venus cycle corresponds to the day eagle. And that has to do with fullness and fullness of priesthood. And I don't understand all of that in detail, but, and then Lord is flower, which also, the word for that in Mayan is Lord. So that's that correspondence. Let's do another slide, and then we're going to almost maybe come to a stopping point here. Let's go to slide 86. So now it's this slide that is what got me started, and I think I've mentioned it before, but this is the place to say it again. This is what I learned. This sentence here is from that book by Skywatchers of Ancient Mexico by Anthony Avini. He said that the Aztecs said that Venus mimics the feathered serpent or the plumed serpent, his life, that he came to visit them in the 1st century AD. That he was born dim and unknown. He became a bright prophet at his prime when he's baptized, right? And then they said he was killed soon after. And if you remember the first slide I showed on the orbit of Venus, it's not very long after its prime that it dies. And they said that's what happened to him. He's, as we know, he's around 29 and a half when he starts, or when he is baptized, and 30 when he actually starts his ministry. And it's only a 3-year ministry, public ministry. And that's what they said. That's why Venus represents him, because it goes from being bright to dying in about 2 months out of the 9 months as an evening star. So he's killed very shortly after he's at prime, and then he resurrected a few days later as morning star. Yes, question. Or maybe I misheard that. I guess I thought there was a question. Okay. So I read that, and I knew the scripture that's at the bottom of this slide, that Jesus had said, I, Jesus, am the bright and morning star. And so he said he's the morning star, which I had never understood at that time. And the Aztecs said that the name they called Christ was represented by the morning star, and that his life matches the life of Venus and the feathered serpent. Let's do one more slide and then we'll stop, because it's time to finish this part of the lesson today. But 87, we're good for about 10 slides for 25 minutes. This was the hook that got me into this whole field. I was a happy astronomer with a PhD in modern astrophysics, and I read this sentence. The Aztec tradition was that the resurrection of the plumed serpent occurred at the resurrection of Venus. Now, they didn't say he was born when Venus was born, or he it turns out he was baptized when Venus is at rebirth, but that wasn't in their tradition, or they didn't say he died at the death. And I read that about 1980, and I said, wait a minute. I was just writing an article on the date of the resurrection of Christ. It came out in the Ensign in 85, but it took them years to approve it. And I knew the resurrection date of Christ, and I had Venus tables. This was before computers and desktops at home. We had big computers at work that filled the room. And I had tables of where Venus was on every day in history. And I just looked up in my book, where was Venus on the 3rd of April, Sunday the 3rd of April in AD 33. And it was bright and rising, almost not the brightest, but it was a bright rising morning star shortly after, right at the time of the resurrection. And when the calendar got discovered and actually made, it turns out he resurrected right on the day, one resurrection of the Venus calendar. I saw that and I said, wait a minute, something really important is going on here. The Aztecs apparently have preserved this tradition from the time Christ came for 1,500 years. I was hooked. I said, there's got to be a lot more to this. I need to understand the Venus calendar, and then that led to all of the other calendars. And I needed to understand the sacred round to get the Venus. So those were the first ones I worked on. Okay, let's stop there, because we've got the basis now for a Venus calendar. And next week we'll talk about some certain days in the life of Christ, which were holy days on the Venus calendar. But right now it's time to turn to questions. And I don't think, I'm not aware of questions I have received during the week. So I'll just open it. I can see now the list of who's here. We got 7. And I've got other things I can talk about if there aren't, but let's open it to any questions. Oh, wait a minute, I'm supposed to be smart and click on, okay, yeah, you do. I click on the chat button. Oh yeah, here we go. All right, I just clicked on the chat button. I can learn these things. Why do the Aztecs consider Christ as a plumed, yeah, it's not flowered serpent, it's a feathered serpent. Why a serpent and why plumed? Okay, that one I can respond to. So, all right, yeah, I'll keep my chat box open here. Well, boy, this was just published in an article a month or so ago. There's symbolism through the scriptures and in lots of places about a prophet, a seer, and a revelator. And they have different roles. And a symbol of a prophet is usually often a bird of some kind. An eagle is a classic, because they can fly. I don't mean a prophet, a revelator. A revelator is someone that can see the future. John the Revelator talks about the future and the past. And it's like a bird flying high that can see forward and see backward, an eagle. A prophet is someone that is in touch with God now and doesn't talk a lot about. Prophets don't prophesy as a rule. Prophets say, they lead people and say, this is the will of God. God is saying this, and we should all do this at this point. We should build a temple, something like that, rather than the tribulation will start on such and such a date, and that kind of thing. So a prophet is represented by a serpent because they're in touch with the ground. They feel things. And the seer is represented by often a feathered serpent. The Mosiah chapter, is it 8 verse 16 or vice versa, says that a seer is greater than a prophet because he's a prophet and a revelator too. And so he's both a bird and a serpent. And so you get a feathered serpent, a plumed serpent, or other things that are flying serpents of some sort. Christ, his symbol as the feathered serpent, I believe, is showing that he's the highest of those. And it's also, there's lots of meanings. The bird is also symbolic of an angel or a heavenly being, and the serpent is a human. In this analogy, it's usually dragons that are the bad guys, and even that's not always the case. But in the sacred realm, the dragon is the bad guy. The serpent is a man being reborn, and a lot of the prophets are born on the serpent day. None of them are born on dragon days, that I've found. Anyway, so it's Christ is the one person who is half God and half man. And so the flying part is the angelic, godlike part, and the serpent part is the mortal part. So he's half God, half man, and he's also a seer. And to me, those are the reasons that he was the plumed serpent.
Hey, and John, before you get to my other question I put in the chat,
yeah,
I think it was back in early 2000, you wrote an article on your webpage about the fiery flying serpents and what happened with Moses. How does that relate to, because he was put on a pole?
Yeah. So right now, as far as I know, we don't have any actual flying serpents. In fact, that might be what, well, let's not go into what might be. We don't have any. So I have a friend that gave me this idea, and we wrote a joint paper. And the question arises, what kind of snake was that? What kind of serpent was that was put on a pole? And the fiery has a double meaning in Hebrew, and the meaning is, one is it's actually red colored, fiery looking, and the other is it's poisonous that burns. The poison it feels like fire. It's burning. And this friend of mine had done most of the study and found it, and we wrote a joint paper. I forget what I did. I just kind of helped present it and logically and all of that part. But it's called a saw-scale viper. And it's the deadliest snake in the world in causing the most deaths. And it hunts birds. It hides in bushes, and it can jump out so high that it catches birds in flight. And it's right in the area where Moses was, and they're still there. And soldiers that wear the big boots that would march through this area and the tough pants. And it's a snake's only a couple of feet, 2.5 feet long or something, and it's bright red, but it can jump so high that it would bite the soldiers in the waist and their shirt, through their shirt. And so it still killed everybody. It's not for boots. Anyway, that apparently is the fiery flying serpent that was placed on the pole. And so it actually was more of a serpent. But they fly as best they can without wings. They're amazing. Does that answer your question, Glenn?
Yeah, it does.
Okay, because that's about all I can say. But I think it's symbolic of actually having wings and flying, but it just, it's the best you got if you don't have wings. Okay, now question I see from Glenn on the chat. Can you describe more what you learned about light present at the conception? Oh, it was just one of these Instagram factoids of the day where it just said that at the time of conception, they had a picture of it. An actual spark of light is given off, and you can photograph that with a microscope. And I actually posted that on my home Instagram, and my kids all responded, "Wow, you're just learning that for once. We know something before you did." So I was I guess other people knew that first. I was the last kid on my block, I guess, to get that one. But that's how it's described in the literature. I forget where I first saw it, but I saw in the reading somewhere that the ancients considered conception to be the spark of life, and I just thought it was symbolic of life. So, and the symbol I use for that, the creation or the conception, is the rising sun. And I got that from the Olmecs. All of the different Indian tribes use different pictures. And boy, they have different pictures for that first one, because it's the fetus in the womb. The Aztecs had an alligator floating in the water as representing the fetus. The Mayans had, I think it's a flower floating in the water, a little more pleasant, but something floating in the water. But the oldest ones of the Olmecs, which I believe are the Jaredites, from 1500 BC, and they had this calendar. I believe it came over with the Jaredites because they had it. And their picture was a picture of the sun for conception. And so I used theirs as the most authentic. That's about it on that question. Let me make a comment on something I talked about. I said a new paper came out today, and I'm not really notifying anybody because they're not for everybody. But one thing for I see Gary Gibson is here. One thought for him is he's one of the few that actually use my spreadsheet, and I finally did update my spreadsheet today to use what I believe is the latest and hopefully final star calendar arrangement, and that's the paper that came out today. The paper that came out on November 27th was the final arrangement of the stars, and the one today is saying what are the holy days, and there's really a lot of holy days on the star calendar. We'll do that later. Oh yeah, if you want to click on that, click on the top article, Uniform Star Calendar Holy Days, and scroll.
Did Edda Draconis? Oh, sorry. Did Edda Draconis move?
Say that again.
Edda Draconis?
Yeah.
The gut filling?
Yeah. No, that didn't move. So that's Moses'
okay.
thing, and that stayed. But the day before that, which some people, and let's not talk about that much. You can do your own thing. The day before that, which some people are interested in, that you'll see that changed. Anyway, keep rolling down to almost the end, and you'll see the real point of this article. Scroll way down, and then we're done for today, I think. Keep scrolling down. More the results. Here we go. One more. There we go. There, right here. Up to that graph of all the stars. I've got 4 of these. Yeah, right there. Just leave that there as a typical thing. I've got 4 of those graphs. So for every day of the year, I show the star, the name, the Greek name. The colors have to do with the orange it's more information than you probably want, but to me it's a great reference thing, so you can look up a day. But the red days are holy days, blue are minor holy days, orange are the bright stars, green are the what do you call it, the lunar mansions. And I got the names. Anyway, this is the result of decades of work, and I believe it's actually done now. And I don't expect any of you. That's why I didn't notify anybody. I thought if they find it on my site, fine. But
There's definitely a lot to digest.
There's a lot here, but boy, I'll tell you, when it's amazing the information. You see how much information was just in a simple Venus cycle, where it's got 9 points and 9 holy points in the cycle and baptism and just simple things. This is much farther beyond that. And I'm just starting to wrap around the depth of this. Anyway, that's enough on that, just for you to know that this research is progressing. And now the next one, I'll even tell you the next paper and then open it to one more question. The next paper, with any luck, God willing, is going to be, and God helping, is going to be, this calendar in this paper is just the uniform calendar. The actual star calendar goes through the seasons. And so Passover at the time of Abraham was in Taurus, but Passover at Christ was in Aries on the ram. Passover now is in Pisces, when Elijah came to the temple. And no, let's not say Elijah, when the Savior came to the temple in 1836. That's Easter Sunday, and it's in Pisces. So that calendar's holy days are much more complicated, and it's still being discovered exactly when they change. I haven't got that nailed down yet, so hopefully that will be discovered soon so that can be published.
This is like the mother lode. It's kind of the ultimate culmination of decades of work. It's quite amazing. There's probably so much in here that to dig through it is a fun process.
Yeah, so this picture is really the same as the one that was in last month's article. It was all black and white. There weren't any holy days. Nothing was listed, and they weren't even all known at that time. And I'm not sure I've got them all right now. But if I waited till I knew everything, and I never would have published anything. It's a work in progress. But it's mature enough to pick this fruit from the tree, even though it may be still not quite ripe. It's close enough to test. So anyway, but that's just a lot of fun doing all that graphics. Oh my goodness. It's a good thing I learned how to do layers. Okay, it is close to 1:45. Unless there's a final quick question, I think we're all done.
I have a final quick question, unless someone else does.
Okay.
So in the book of Moses, it was 663. I think it's Genesis 4 now because it's the Joseph Smith translation. It's right when the Lord was teaching Adam the doctrine of Christ. And then after he taught about the Holy Ghost in Moses 661, then he teaches that fascinating thing where he says, all things that I've given unto man are a likeness and typification of Christ. So with that background, we learned about Venus, and it's so closely aligned to the Lord's life, right?
Right.
But with it, okay, so we now have Venus. What about the other planets that are there? There has to be some other aspect with the cycles of different planets, but I guess my question, Venus is the most closely aligned that you found, correct?
Well, it's the one that Christ identifies himself with in Revelation. He says, I am the bright morning star. So it's the most about his life, not just that I found, it's the one that he says himself represents.
And is there any other planet that is as descriptive or aligned as Venus? Or is that the one?
That's the main one, but yeah, I can comment on that. Mercury, we'll do that later. I got 2 quick comments. One is Mercury Mercury goes around really fast. It goes around its cycle is 3 times per year instead of a year and 1.6 years. And so for somebody that only lives 33 years, like the Savior, you can line up a lot more things. So it lines up, the Savior is born on the day one Lord, he's baptized on the day one Lord, and he resurrects on the day one Lord on the Mercury calendar.
Oh.
So you get a lot more alignments, but you get the most alignments on Venus. You can't do all of those cycles, but what you can do with Venus, and we'll see that starting next week, is there's 9 key holy days. We've already seen that in the Venus cycle. The 9 key events of Jesus's life all happened on a different holy day. So birth, resurrection, we'll go through that. So it's the most aligned. But let me make one comment on Mars, because the different planets all bring out different aspects of life in general. This is the life cycle of everything. Christ is just the perfect man, the perfect prototype. But all of the planets are like the life cycle, and all the trees and geology and everything testifies of Christ, one way or another. But the neat thing about the Mars cycle, on the Venus cycle, you don't really see the difference between adult and going from adult to rebirth at prime. You just have to believe that it's a negative thing. In the Mars cycle, Mars actually stops and goes backwards. When it hits adult, it goes into what's called retrograde motion, and it actually backs up against the star background. And then when it's reborn, it turns around and goes forward again. So it is marvelous symbolism. But again, that isn't so much symbolic of Christ. He didn't really back up and have a bad face, but it's symbolic of all the rest of us, so of life in general. Okay, so that's enough. We're past time. Anyway, I'm glad we had as many as we did, and we'll do this again next week.
All right. Sounds good. I'll save the recording and shoot it off to Restoration Archives so everyone could see it later. Thanks, John, again.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Bye-bye.
See you later.